Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another edition of our webinar series, Inside Immigration. Today, we're joined by panelists Cristina, Guida, and Sonia, Sidhu. Please feel free to ask any questions via the pop-up text bar on the right side of your screen, and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the webinar. If the panelists do not get to your question, you can contact them directly through the information provided on screen now. And with that being said, I'm going to hand things over to our panelists.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Cristina Guida, and I'm here with Sonia Sidhu. So we're here to give you guys an update in terms of what's happening in immigration this month. February is a great news month. There's lots of updates for us to share. So I will start on the temporary resident side and the travel restrictions, and then Sonia will take us through some of the updates as they relate to permanent residency. So as I said, lots of good news to share in February. We see some positive and promising changes at the border. As the government stated in their February 15th news release, Canada is moving towards a more sustainable approach to long-term management of COVID-19, and that means the travel restrictions that we've been seeing over the last 2 years, we're starting to see an ease in those restrictions and seeing a bit more flexibility and allowing travel to happen a little bit more fluidly, where we don't have to have so many checklists in place. So as of February 28th, with the expiration of the current order in council, as I said, we'll be seeing the easing of border measures. So what is most exciting is for fully vaccinated travelers, Canada will be returning to random testing for all vaccinated travelers. So that means where we were seeing mandatory testing at the border, PCR testing, we're now seeing people will be randomly selected for the PCR arrival tests. And the mandatory testing regime no longer means that you have to stay in quarantine while you wait for the test results. So I know that was a point of, of stress for a lot of travelers that had to wait for a mini quarantine period until they got the results of their PCR test upon arrival to Canada. So as of February 28th, that will be lifted. So I know that's great news, especially for people with children or who have to go back to work. So it's great news. The other great news as it relates to family members is that Canada is lifting the restrictions for children less than 12 who are not fully vaccinated. So if they're traveling with their fully vaccinated parents, they no longer have to isolate and they are not subject to a test and other testing requirements. So again, that allows a lot of flexibility for families who are traveling, especially with March break coming up. I'm sure a lot of people will be glad to be able to go on a trip and not have to worry about the quarantine period. Other great news that I know will be, everyone will be happy to know, especially as they're planning March break, or maybe they weren't and now they can consider it, is that Canada is changing their pre-board testing. As we saw previously, anyone traveling to Canada would have to get a PCR test that was completed 72 hours before their travel to Canada. As of February 28th, you can now use an antigen test or a PCR test. So the antigen test must be administered by a lab. It can't be an at-home test, and that can be done 24 hours before your travel, or you can do the 72-hour PCR test. So again, that's great news. Just know that the at-home tests won't work. The rapid test, antigen test won't work at home. You'll have to go to a lab to do it. And the other great news is all airports have been reopened to receive international travelers. So that means, where we were just seeing the larger hubs accepting travelers, now that means all of the airports are reopened. As always, the Arrive Can app will continue to be in operation, so all travelers should make sure to download the latest version of that and make sure that they've uploaded all of their vaccine certificates, place of quarantine, etc., should they have to. And yeah, so for fully vaccinated travelers, we're seeing positive news. I want to be clear here that there are no changes to unvaccinated travelers. They will continue to have to quarantine, have the PCR test, and then also do the 8-day test. So just be mindful of that. So any of the changes we just discussed are for fully vaccinated travelers. And again, fully vaccinated vaccinated if you've had at least 2 doses of the approved vaccines by the Canadian government. Those that have been approved by the Canadian government. So that's great news for people who want to travel. We also saw great changes as it relates to postgraduate work permits. On February 7th, the government outlined that they extended the instructions for postgraduate work permits. So where we were seeing that students who enrolled in post-graduation work eligible programs from March 2020 until the summer of 2022, they can complete 100% of their program of study outside of Canada and still remain eligible for the postgraduate work permit. So if you'll recall, this program was introduced early on in the pandemic to facilitate students and their inability to travel because of backlogs, travel restrictions, etc. So those measures have been extended. Those expired on December 31st, 2021. And they've since been extended until August 31st, 2022. So again, if you are enrolled in a approved program and you studied from March 2020 until the summer of 2022, you can complete 100% of your program of study outside of Canada and still remain eligible for the postgraduate work permit. So again, very positive news on the temporary resident side of things. Sonia, I'll hand it over to you to talk about all the changes as it relates to permanent residency.
Thank you, Cristina. So PR may not be as positive. There is good things and bad things have come out of February for PR. So on February 14th, IRCC did release immigration levels plan, where it outlined the quota in particular programs, their overall quotas for 2022 to 2024. So we did see some programs where the quotas had increased, and then others where there has been a significant decrease. And in those programs, we weren't expecting such a decrease. So for example, the PNPs are on the rise. We're going from 83,000 to 86,000 to 93,000 over the next 3 years. With the parentals are also growing about a couple thousand every year. Where we did see a significant decrease was the federal high skills, so which was the FSW, the CECs, where in the previous plan it was about 100,000 in the year, but for 2022, the target has been outlined for a little less than 56,000, which is a significant decrease. Then the next year for 2023, they're aiming around 75,000, and then overall to 2024, we're hoping it's back up over the 100,000 mark. So it's a significant decrease and then a gradual increase over the next couple of years. Same thing with business PR. It is stuck at 1,000 for the next 3 years. So it's not good news for the startup visa programs. However, these programs are already very competitive. So if you do qualify for these programs, you should be getting in your application as soon as possible, because over the next 3 years, nothing is seeming like it's going to get better in terms of how many applications they're going to accept. They have outlined that they're hiring about 500 new staff members to improve processing. Anybody that's in immigration right now knows that processing times have fallen way off track in terms of their standard processing, but they are promising to start processing things faster. They're saying where they were processing about 150 cases a week, now they're at about 800 cases a week. So they're expecting the FSW inventory and the CEC inventory to be cleared off in the next couple of months, which really then takes us to this internal memo that was released in January. It was written in November, but it was released in January pursuant to an ATIP request. And the memo actually showed a stark shift in immigration priorities in Canada, because for many years, FSW, CEC were pretty much the prominent immigration pathways. And this memo outlines that there's a pause on invites until at least February, which we are in right now, and we still haven't seen any invites for February. The memo did also suggest that the next drop would most likely be in the summer, so mid-2022. And they further outlined that they have enough inventory right now that they don't have to do any new draws to meet the immigration targets for 2022. So all that makes sense, because if we're speculating they're going to draw in the summer, by the time those applications are assessed and processed, we're actually hitting the 2023 immigration targets. So it makes sense that we may not see an invite until mid-2022. We also noted in the memo that there was a significant increase in processing of federal skilled worker applications. It went from 6 months to 12 months, and now we're looking at closer to 2 years. So we also advise, like, if you do have a pending application and it's past the normal thresholds, it might be time to start talking to a lawyer about what you can do to move your file forward. There's certain demands you can put in, or federal court mandamus applications. So just don't rely on if within the processing times that the memo says. Look online and say, hey, have I passed that normal threshold that's posted online? If I have, maybe I need to start looking into my application. So basically, the overall immigration plan is positive in some notes, negative in other notes, but reality is over the next couple of years, we should be staggering back to where we were previously. So that also takes us into how we see an increase in the numbers that are coming for PNPs, which Ontario has actually shown a change in the way they're doing draws right now. So in February, there has been some significant changes in the draws that we have seen come out for the OINP. So even yesterday, there was a human capital stream draw, which targeted particular NOCs, which is not abnormal. But the score range was 455 to 600. Now, this is significant because OINP usually ranged from 455 to 466. And anything above that, if your score was above that, you wouldn't get invited into this human capital stream, which all made sense when the express entry draws were happening, because if you qualify for CEC, you wouldn't want an OINP draw because it's longer processing, it's more work. But now that there's no CEC draws, Ontario really picked up on, hey, we're cutting off the upper limit. So maybe we should extend our upper limit, actually target individuals that are scoring higher rather than cutting them out of the application process. So this was the first draw where they actually capped it at 600, which is a higher limit. So we hope that we're going to see this going forward, and individuals that aren't being invited under CEC will now start getting invites under the OINP. Another draw they did one on February 8 and 9, which was a targeted NOC draw, as well as a foreign worker job offer stream. This was significant because the targeted NOCs, the score cutoff was 24, which is actually one of the lowest cutoffs we've seen. So reality is, the lesson to learn in immigration right now is if you qualify for the program, even if it's CEC, FSW, or PNP, put your name in the hat, because we have no idea what's coming, how low the scores are going to be, how high they're going to be. Sometimes we see these crazy low draws, and sometimes we see high draws. For example, last year in February, there was a draw for 75 in the CEC program. So if you do qualify for a program, put your name in the hat so you can actually have the chance of being selected. If your work permit is coming up to expiry soon, it would be very vital that you do talk to a professional and say, how can I extend my work permit while I ride out a hopeful draw for PR? The last big update we saw on the PR side was there is a new case tracker for family class sponsorship applications under the permanent residence applications. So basically, there was a tracker introduced last year for the citizenship files, and now they've tried to extend this to the family class applications. So family class applications are your parentals, your spousals, your common laws, your dependent children. So if you've submitted a file under these categories, you can create your online portal to try to track where they are in the process of your immigration file. Keep in mind, guys, these are all online systems. They still need human interaction. So if there's an update on your file, there still has to be a human that inputs that update onto the tracker. So there might be times where you do receive an update, but it's actually not in your tracker, or vice versa. Sometimes we have seen that the tracker says, hey, your application has been decided, but no one has actually sent us that decision. So it's good to have a point base for it, but it's not, all the kinks aren't worked out. And at the end of the day, keep in mind everything, there's still a human factor to everything. So give it a couple of more months to try to figure out all the kinks, and then hopefully it'll be a better tracker in the future. So basically, those are our updates. If we do have any questions, we're more than happy to answer them.
Yeah, and while we wait for any questions to come in, just Sonia, on your point to talk about some of the changes in the express entry system or the PNP. So last week, Minister Fraser actually spoke at the Canadian Club in Toronto, where a lot of the discussions about, the numbers and, meeting the targets and who they're targeting, those discussions came up. So the minister made some interesting comments talking about, implementing flexibility in the express entry system, specifically to address short-term needs, depending, he said, on issues like different sectors or smaller communities that can support immigration. So it almost signaled that he'd be able to maybe, change things in the express entry system to do more targeted draws. So that's something that's really important to keep in mind, to Sonia's point, that if you qualify and you happen to live in a specific region, or maybe in a sector that's in high demand, or there's a low number of, there's job vacancies, it's still worth to always just put yourself in the express entry system. Because again, as Sonia said, we never really know what's going to happen. And he said that doing this and being able to target things in the express entry system would enable the government to respond in a more nimble way. So I think that was a really good foreshadowing for what might be coming in the next year or two as they work through the backlogs. I think they're going to start doing things in a more targeted way. So it's important that everybody plan ahead and just put yourselves in the express entry pool and reach out to us if you have any questions or you'd like to discuss that further.
Thanks, Cristina. I'm just having a look here at the questions pane, and it seems like there is no questions that have come in yet. So I guess we were super clear, which is always good. So I suppose we'll call it here. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and a special thanks to you, Cristina and Sonia, for sharing your expert knowledge today. For those who'd like to discuss today's topics in more detail, please reach out to book a consultation. You can find the email addresses of Cristina and Sonia on screen now. I'd also like to encourage you all to sign up to our alerts and follow us on social media to keep up to date the latest developments inside Canadian immigration. And until next time, everybody, stay safe, and thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.